All right. Good morning, everybody. Happy New Year again. I know at some point you have to stop saying that. I know there's a date. It's probably before the 14th, but and next week. All right. Okay. So I'm still good on doing. Hey, two or three health updates. Uh, uh, Back in December, I'd ask you to pray for Ashley. Ashley Balding now did her wedding a number of years ago. She and Tim live in Texas, but Ashley and Molly grew up here in our church, the Gabrys, just a wonderful family. And Ashley and my daughter Stephanie were classmates, and she had a friend, mid 40s, her age, that was just diagnosed with some heart issues. Ashley was fine, but it kind of prompted in her mind, I don't know that I've ever had my heart checked out. So she went and ended up with two valve replacements. Okay. This just goes back now for weeks, and still in trouble. And she ended up this past week getting a pacemaker. Okay. But that was the deal. Okay. So went home. After really weeks and weeks missing, got two small kids, missed family during the holidays, but home now and doing well. I wanted to let you know about that. We're grateful for that. And then I wanted to let you know. I know the class is getting younger, but at the back table, Patrick, y'all wave your hand. Just kind of wave your hand, all of you. This family of mom and dad are real faithful. Patrick works for Crew. This is their daughter and son-in-law, and their 5-month-old son, Asher. And Asher has struggled, okay, with intestinal issues, and that have only worsened. And so I was made aware of it last week, just to pray that they could get in to see a specialist, and which miraculously they were able to do that. And any of us who deal with the medical system now, if you can get into anything immediately, it's miraculous. And they got in, and so as a result of that, this Tuesday, having a procedure, it's surgery. It's I guess for adults it would be more like a colonoscopy for us, but for a 5-month-old, and you have to fast. You get ready. I mean, just think of implications and what have you. But that surgery is sometime early Tuesday morning. I don't know. They don't know yet. They'll find out tomorrow. But they came in earlier, and Patty and Tom and myself, we just kind of circled up and laid hands on little Asher and prayed for him and for them in this difficult time. And they wanted to stay for the class. And I said, well, that's probably the youngest that's ever attended Journey. That's for sure. Okay. So our class just got younger. This ought to be the day that we do an average age. Okay, we just went way down. But hey, I met a few of you that here we are in the first of the year. So for the next several months, between folks that are down for Wycliffe and that are down as winter residents, some of them are starting to arrive, because I saw a few of them this morning that I haven't seen since last March or April, and they're back. So we'll probably have in the next few weeks and months somewhere between 20 25 of our winter residents who will be back and be a part of us in the next few weeks. We're glad to have you back, maybe to your second home, but good to have you back. Okay. Hey, a few things before we get going here. Here's my email address. If you are a guest, I would really love for you to reach out to me, so I'll have a chance to kind of reach back to you and get to know you a little bit better. Next, just some social media stuff here. That's the Journey Facebook link. Facebook Journey LG. That's where I do a lot of communication. So if you're a social media person, I know you have to be careful. I know I have to be careful. I've just realized here in the last few days, because I've had a few you say something, evidently my Facebook got hacked, and folks are using me to connect with you, and starts off with, have you heard the good news? And I think they end up asking you for $50,000 or something. Okay. Do not give them that money. Give it to me, but do not give them that money. Okay. And got a new password set up, so hopefully I'll get that straightened out. But those kind of things happen. Those of you that know these lessons, back up just one if you would please, are live stream now on YouTube and Facebook, and then as soon as we finish, it will be available on YouTube, and I hope you'll subscribe to that channel. So every time we do a new one, that you'll get it. I cover a lot of information. In the next 3 weeks, I will cover more information than I have ever covered. Okay, and so it'll be a lot to absorb, trust me. So it may be something you want to go back and re-listen to from a standpoint of number one, I've never heard that, or standpoint of number two, I had forgotten that, or standpoint of number three, I'm not sure I agree with that. Okay, and you have every right to be wrong on that. Okay, so whatever the case may be, but please subscribe. And then this next slide, Kathy, kind of wave your hand. Okay. We have a really good distribution list through email, and if you don't know for certain that we have your email, so I can stay in touch with you about what's going on in the Journey class, if you will email Kathy, Kathy with an I, Lombard at Gmail, then we'll have it and we'll get you added to the distribution list as soon as possible. All right, a couple other things is I was in a leadership meeting last Sunday morning at 11:30 with a number of other life group leaders at the church. And next slide, Monty, if you would. They asked if we could provide some friendly, outgoing, loving Jesus, loving Journey, and loving Jimmy people. That's all important, not in that order. Loving Jesus, loving Jimmy, loving Journey. Okay, let me get the order right. And to be available after the 8:30 service, goes to go to I'm not sure exactly where to go, but basically for folks that would fit in this class, and this is a very eclectic class, and there are not many of those that are available on Sunday mornings at 10 o'clock. And there's a steady stream of folks coming out of worship, okay, that are looking for groups. And so I talked with Patty about it this morning. And if you'd be interested, I think what would happen is if I get enough, you probably only need to do this once a month. Okay, but here's how I want to do it. But again, catch me after class in this talk, is that you would go to the help desk afterwards. And as people came, wanting to get into a group, and this group would meet their needs, you would escort them up here and take them to your table and be seated. In other words, you won't go back. Okay, you'll just stay with them. That way they've already got a connect, already got a friendly face that they're with. So if you'd be interested in helping, see me afterwards, and I'll tell you what your next step will be. Okay, and then in the 1st of February, next Monty, is here's the next series, Faith with Boots On. Okay, a verse by verse study in the book of James. I think the last time I taught through this book was 32 years ago, and I can't believe it'd been that long. But it's such apropos study. James writes this to believers who are scattered and under persecution and facing difficult living. It sounds like our world. And James deals with 12 or 13 different, issues related to the Christian experience and how to live those out in difficult situations. From temptation and many others. So we're going to start that first Sunday in February. I'll be reminding you, but I want to encourage you maybe to start reading in the book of James and becoming familiar with it. Probably going to be in it for about 4 or 5 months once we get started in February. I don't have it all laid out, but I wanted to let you know where we're coming so you get started. Okay, today and next week. And the next week, I'm going to do a short series. I've titled it, What's So Special About Israel? Today, part one is going to be kind of looking historically back at the nation of Israel and kind of how it got started, where it came from, a little bit at present day Israel, and a little bit at prophetically what's going to happen to Israel. And then next week, I'm going to deal specifically with Israel and America's relationship to Israel, and how that connects to end times. And then third is going to be looking at specifically what's gone on since October 7th, but yet that's gone on for a long time with Hamas. Looking specifically at Hamas, Israel, and end times. So that's where we're going the next few weeks. I told Linda, I started when the Lord said, I want you to do this the first of the year. This was around Thanksgiving time. And I told Linda, I can't remember ever spending, and I always spend 20 hours a week for the week. Probably for these two, I pretty much finished next week's as well. I really have probably spent 50 hours in trying to assimilate all this information in the packages where we wouldn't be here until dinner, and so I could get it out to you. So hopefully it will be helpful. Open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 12. Genesis chapter 12. We'll get there in just a minute. But the story of Israel and the Jewish people, I think, is one of the most compelling and important in history, in all of Earth history. I don't think that most Americans, including most evangelical Christians, understand that story. We don't hear much about it. And I think the result of a combination of the increasing secularization of our country, the increasing liberalization of the media, the increasing indoctrination of our educational institutions, and a lack of enough biblical teaching. You throw all of that together, I think there's a world of ignorance about what's so special about Israel. Less, and you'll see that statistically in a minute, less of you in this room simply because of your age, to be very honest. But I want to read you some statistics because, we're watching all of the pro-Palestinian protest across the country, largely, 30 and under, largely, not exclusively, but largely. And there's a tremendous generational divide between Israel and what's happening in Israel and Hamas and what happened on October 7th. Tremendous generational divide between folks, let's say 60 and older, which encompasses a lot of us in the room, we're close to it, and those that are 30 and under, which we don't have many of those in the room. But all of us, even in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 65 plus, we have adult children and grandchildren who are in that younger group. And much of what is happening in terms of the protests is based on the media bias that the young are buying into ignorantly, and their own ignorance about Israel, and then the media bent toward anti-Semitism, especially, and I'll get into that more next week, especially in the last 25 years, since the early 90s. And this happened. Largely, as I'll share with you next week, it won't be a surprise. Much of what's happening, though America is still Israel's strongest ally, it is not as strong as an ally as it once was. And that's largely as a result of the decisions that have been made related to oil. And America has found itself trapped because poor decisions that it's made and finding itself in need. Interestingly, I'm going to ask God this question when I get to heaven. God, why would you establish a nation and a people and a land, and especially Israel, that when you look all around the nation of Israel, okay, there's oil everywhere, okay, but there's not one drop of oil in Israel, okay. So that compromise has led America further away from the strong support that it once has toward Israel, and it's all based on money and survival. And it's caused us to weaken our commitment, though we're still the strongest committed to them. And one of the primary purposes of the series is to help us to understand as evangelical believers how important that it is for us to do everything that we can to support Israel. That doesn't mean that we will always agree with their actions and methodology, because sometimes we won't. But as a whole, we need to do everything we can to use our influence to help our political leaders to strengthen and to grow in their support for Israel. And by the time I finish this lesson, you will understand, and even more so next week, because the track that I'm going to walk you through next week in history of where are the nations that once strongly supported Israel, where are they in terms of their impact globally today? And for the most part, they're non-influential, which is exactly where America is headed. Okay, so a little bit ahead of myself, but here's some research just done in recent weeks by the Philos Project, which is faith-based, about self-identified Christian. Again, I want you to see this this divide generationally, just to give you a few items, just drawn from it. There's so much here, but just drawn from it so you can see it. U.S. Christians aged 65 and older are most likely to say that they have a positive perception of the country of Israel. 78%. 78%. 29 and under, 42%. Okay, less than half. Less than half. Self-identified Christians, okay? Self-identified, this is evangelical Christians, 65 and older, okay, are most likely to say that Hamas attacked Israel on October 7, killing 1,400 people, mostly civilians, and that Hamas took hostages, okay? 75%. Those under 30, less than 50%. So where are they getting their information? Okay? There was so much to this, it was so helpful, but the support for, in terms of saying, does the U.S. Only 29% of those under 30 say that U.S. is doing enough to support Israel. That's less than a third of those under 30, which is a growing area. It's this I got this sent to me, and it was just fascinating to see this generational divide. And I told Linda that probably the people that are needing to hear this more are not in the room. Okay, but maybe between the parents and the grandparents, we can help them to understand. Okay, so let's explore the Israel story, and let's look, I think, really what's at the beginning in Genesis chapter 12. Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 3. I'll give you a little bit of context here in a minute. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make you." Notice the number of, I think there are 5. I will, I will, I will, I will, I will. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors or those who curse you, I will curse. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. This is God's giving of establishing of a covenantal, called the Abrahamic covenant, covenantal relationship with Abram. In the Bible, there are two kinds of covenants. One is a bilateral where both parties bear responsibilities, or the covenant can be dissolved. This is not one of those. This is not one of those, and I'll show you in a minute. This one is unilateral in that the only person who takes responsibility in this Abrahamic covenant is God. Is God. In Genesis chapter 15, and turn over there if you got your Bible. The covenant was spoken and given in Genesis 12. Now we kind of see the ceremony that substantiates it by doing what's called cutting a covenant. What normally happened is they would take sacrificial animals and cut them in half and separate the halves of the animals, whatever those animals were. It could be as small as birds, as big as cows, and separate those. And if it was a two-party agreement, they would walk between the cuts and cut a covenant of an agreement. I bear responsibility, you bear responsibility. You shirk your responsibility, I shirk mine, covenant ends. Notice what happens in this one. Again, it's not bilateral, it's unilateral. And he said to him, God, I am the Lord. This is to Abram. I am the Lord who brought you from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess. But he said, O Lord God, how am I to know that I shall possess it? And he said to him, bring me a heifer 3 years old, a she-goat 3 years old, a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. Those are the sacrificial animals. And he brought him all of these, cut them in two, and laid each half over against each other, but he did not cut the birds in two, maybe because they were so small. I don't know. Okay? And when the birds of prey came down upon the carcasses, he drove them away. And as the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram, and lo, a dread and great darkness fell upon him. Then the Lord said to Abram, know of a surety that your descendants will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be slaves there, and they will be oppressed for 400 years. That's referring to the Egyptian bondage that would take place in the future. But I will bring judgment on the nation which they serve. Bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you. Egypt, 400 years. Okay, that will be a pattern, trust me. Okay, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. As for yourself, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age, and they shall come back here in the fourth generation, and so on. What you see is here is that the one that's kind of walking through. Watch what happens now. When the sun had gone down and it was dark, behold, a smoking firepot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. That is the writer's effort to give some symbolic representation of God. This is God, the smoking pot, the flaming fire. He is walking through the pieces, not Abram. So God is the one that's establishing, cutting the covenant, and bearing sole responsibility in the covenant to make a promise and to do what he said that he would do. Now go back to Genesis 12. Go back to Genesis 12. So he gave the covenant verbally, and then he cuts the covenant with him. And I didn't want to take the time to go over a couple of chapters later in chapter 17. That's where God sets up what I would call the sign of the covenant people. And that was the sign in all Jewish males of circumcision. So this covenant is spoken, and at least, I don't have time to turn to all of it, but at least 10 more times in Abraham's life does God remind or review the covenant that he made to him here in Genesis chapter 12. Sometimes he only refers to the land. Sometimes in the renewal, he only refers to the nation. And sometimes it refers only to the seed of promise that is to come. But at least 10 times. And it is renewed, it's going to be, and it is renewed with Isaac, who was Abraham's what? Son. And then it is renewed later to Jacob, who was one of Isaac's son, and was the progenitor of the 12 tribes of Israel. Are you with me? Okay. So it's not like God said this and I'll do it. He kept repeating it, I guess you could say, for emphasis. So let me try to answer what makes Israel then so special. First, and you'll see up here, let's go next slide, please. God's providence or determination in choosing Abraham. In choosing Abraham, let me give you a little bit of a timeline. I think creation probably took place around 4000 BC. Okay, creation. You've got the garden. How long Adam and Eve lived in that paradise, I don't know, but a number of years. A number of years. God would show up Himself in the garden in the cool of the day to establish the growing relationship with them. But eventually, the tempter showed up, and the fall happened, and sin entered the world. Creation 4000. Here we are with Father Abraham, you might say, and we're at about 2000 BC. So about 2,000 years, 2 millenniums have taken place between Genesis 1 and 2, and then the fall in Genesis 3, and then the generations, as it were, of Adam and Eve, all the way through Noah and the flood. Are you with me? That's where things have happened. Okay, now, if you'll back up to chapter 11, and in verse 26, when Terah had lived 70 years, he became the father of Abram. Okay, and then there was Nahor, brother, and then Haran, another brother. Now, these are the descendants of Terah. Terah was the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Stay with me. And Haran was the father of Lot. Haran dies early, okay, for those years, and Lot is Abraham's nephew, and there's some stories here related to Lot. Lot was not a very savory guy, you might say, okay? Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his birth in Ur of the Chaldees. That's over in what you and I would know as Iraq, Iran, Babylon. And Abram and Nahor took, notice, wives. Okay? Wives. So, God providentially is choosing a person named Abram, that the first thing we know about him, he wasn't Jewish because the Jewish people didn't exist. So he's a Gentile. Not only is he a Gentile, he's a polygamist. Okay? And because of the land in which they came from, and it was a land that was agriculturally driven, and they were the sun and the moon and the rain, and those are what controlled fertility and productivity. There were many. The primary idol of worship was a sun and moon god known as, appropriately, Sin. S-I-N. Okay? And Abram grew up in that environment. So God is starting with a man who's a Gentile, who's a polygamist, and who's an idolater. That's who God started with in fathering a nation. Probably not who you and I would choose, but it's who God chose. And He determined. I cannot answer for you why He determined to establish the nation Israel. I'll leave that to Him. I'll put that on one of my questions when I get to heaven. But that's what He did. He chose Abram at this point. And Abram, some outside of Scripture references say that once he came to believe in Yahweh, Jehovah God, that he had all of the idols in his home destroyed and thrown away. There's no biblical evidence of that, but extra biblical evidence says that it happened. I don't know whether that's true or not. So he took the closest example I can give you this. If you go back to the Genesis account where it talks about that God created heaven and earth out of nothing, that's called ex nihilo, out of nothing. That's exactly what God did in creating the nation of Israel, ex nihilo, out of nothing. He took a Gentile idolatrous polygamist and said, "You the man. You the man. You the man." Okay? Now, adding to that, you see His providence and determination. Not only did He providentially choose that kind of a man to be the progenitor of the Jewish people, God miraculously provided a son and then the future generations to Abram and to one of his wives, Sarah to birth Isaac, who would continue, as it were, the covenant that God had established with him. And we see that covenant, Abraham 10 times, Isaac several times, and Jacob several times. Now, what's interesting, continue to follow with me, okay? Verse 30, chapter 11. Now, Sarah was barren. She had no child. It's an interesting little parenthetical statement, is it not? Just kind of boom. Thrown in there. Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his grandson, and Sarah his daughter-in-law, his son's Abram's wife, and they went forth from the Ur of Chaldees, the Babylonian area, okay, where the roots were, to go into the land of Canaan. Land of Canaan. That's Israel, as we know it now. Israel. Okay, we're at about 2000 BC. Okay, we're not in 1948. We're at 2000 BC. Okay? The days of Terah were 205 years, and then Terah died in Iran. So they moved from the Babylonian area, okay, and they traveled just hundreds of miles up into what would be North Iran, maybe southwest, South Turkey, and Syria. Kind of that's where Haran is. And then they make their way down into the land of Canaan, which is that stretch of land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. And Abram makes his way down through there. But there's still no heir. Okay, look in chapter 16 in verse 1. Just want you to see the theme here. 16:1. Now Sarah, Abram's wife, bore him no children. And that begins to be problematic when Abraham is now 86 and she's 76. A little problematic at this point. Okay? But still, nothing has happened. And then there are several other instances, but we all know eventually that Isaac is, when Abraham is told by God, I'm still going to carry the promise through. You remember what Abraham's response was? He laughed. Okay? You remember when Sarah was also told the same thing years later? What did she do? He laughed. I just don't ever think it's good to laugh at God. Okay, I just don't think that's a good thing. But nonetheless, once we make our way, you don't need to turn there. In chapter 21, at 100, at 90, Sarah, Isaac is born, and that becomes, just think about it, 190. Okay, even when they lived to older ages, he lived, I think, 175 years of age. You just didn't make babies at 190. Okay, so God providentially determined to choose a man who was an idolater and a polygamist and a Gentile, and then he chose to do a miraculous conception and birth in order to begin the nation that you and I now know as the Jewish people and Israel. That's how it all got started. It was a miracle for the whole world to see. You mean they had a baby? Isn't that guy 100? Yeah, and she's 90, and they have a baby. So what's so special about Israel? How they got started. Can you tell me another nation that got started anywhere like that? No, because there isn't one, not even America. God had a special plan for them. Next, the next thing is because of God's promises to Abram. Again, go back to Genesis chapter 12. Genesis chapter 12. God makes three promises here. Three promises. Land, nation or people or Israel. And then I will bless, you will be a blessing, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. I think that's a promise of a seed or of the Messiah. So God covenanted, and he gave them a threefold promise. I've got a land for you. I've got a people that are coming out of you. And I've got a Messiah. I have the hope of the world coming out of you. So let's unpack both of those just a little bit. And Genesis chapter 12 and verse 1 is the land promise. But 10 other times, I wish I had 10 other times, are specific references to the land. To the land. Now, I want you to get an idea of the size of the land in Genesis 13, in verse 15. For all of the land which you will see, I will give to you and to your descendants forever. 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 I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth. That's a lot. Kind of like going over to the beach and looking at the sand. So that if anyone can count the dust of the earth, your descendants can also be counted. Arise, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you. So Abram moved his tent and came and dwelt by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar. Okay, now let me give you an idea of the land. This is mentioned in Genesis, Deuteronomy, and Joshua. To give you an idea, you see that area? You see that red marked area? All right, right here's Israel proper right now, right in here. Okay? That's what God promised. That's what God promised. That's about 300,000 square miles. Okay? God gave them that land. He told them to utterly destroy the inhabitants of the land, primarily because of their idolatry, and which Israel never did, by the way. And of that 300,000 acres, go to the next slide. It's another picture of the similar area you see here marked out. That's that's Israel as God has designed. 300,000 square miles. Right now, they're at a little bit over 9,000 square miles, about the size of the state of New Hampshire. Okay? But God said, this is your land, utterly destroy. Okay, now, just quickly, parenthetically. Who got to Canaan first? Abram. Who birthed the Jewish people? Abram. Okay, we're at 1800 to 2000 BC. Now, they didn't actually take the nation until almost 600 years later, as a result of when they left Egypt and Moses marched them to the edge of the promised land, and God did not let him enter. And then Joshua took them all the way in, and they conquered the land. That was about 1220 BC. But who got there first? Israel. Who gave them the land? God. God did. And for those who say, wrongly, ignorantly, well, Israel, they are squatters, they are occupiers. No. God gave them the land. And he hasn't reneged. And they never come anywhere close to possessing all of that land, which they will and more, but not until we enter the millennial kingdom, which I'll talk more about in the next couple of weeks. But pretty much this land promise of the three promises has not been fulfilled. Israel in 586 BC, when the southern kingdom was defeated by Babylon and they were exiled to Babylon, and they were pretty much banished from the country. They did get to return 70 years later, but it was never the same. And then later in AD 70, when the Romans came through, again, 587 BC to AD 70. 600 years, they had been dispersed basically from the land. And I think, again, I'll get into the third point, because of God's judgment on them for not carrying out the responsibilities that he gave them to do. But first, he promised a land. Second, he promised a nation, a people, a nation, a people. And this is repeated 8 times by God. 6 to Abram, once to Isaac, and once to Jacob. I've given you a land, and you're going to be a people. And then third is the promise of a seed, promise of a Savior, promise of a Messiah, promise of blessing the whole world through the hope of the world in the eventual birth of Jesus. And I've given you the references here, but down underneath the seed, I want to read a couple of those. First one I want to read is in John chapter 4. This is in Jesus' conversation with a woman at the well. In John 4 and in verse 22, when they're in this conversation, Jesus says to her, "You worship what you do not know," talking to the woman at the well. "We worship what we know." This is the statement, "For salvation is through the Jews." Jesus was Jewish. Okay, and his lineage. Go to Matthew 1. Go through the genealogy. All the way back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jesus finally born. That's the seed, that's the blessing, that's, as it were, the hope of the world. And this is also mentioned in Acts 3, Galatians 3:8, and in Galatians 3:16. Now, here's what we need to know. Has the promise of the people of Israel, the nation of Israel, has it been fulfilled? Yeah, they exist. There's a nation of Israel. Has the Messiah come? So 2 of these 3 promises have been fulfilled. The land promise, not yet. Not yet. And I don't think it'll be fulfilled until the Messianic age, after the return of Christ. So is Israel special? Yeah, because of how they got started and because of the promises God made to them. But it wasn't because of anything that they were, because they didn't work. But in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 6, let me read these few verses. God says, "For you are a people holy to the Lord your God." The Lord, listen, the Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his own possession out of all of the peoples that are on the face of the earth. It was not because you were more in number than any other people that the Lord set his love upon you and chose you, for you were the fewest of all the peoples. But it was because the Lord loves you and is keeping the oath, here we go, which he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that the Lord has brought you out with his mighty hand and redeemed you from the house of bondage, from the land of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Know therefore that the Lord your God is God, the faithful God, who keeps covenant and steadfast love to those who love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations, and requites to their face those who hate him by destroying them. He will not be slack with those who hate him. He will requite in their face. You shall do, therefore, be careful to do the commandments and the statutes and ordinances which I command you. Just keep in mind, bless those who bless you and curse those who dishonor those who dishonor you. Okay? Third, next, please. God's punishment of Israel and of the nations. God gave Israel responsibilities to take the land of Canaan, which from as far north as the land of Canaan went, as far south, you couldn't go west because of the sea, and to the east, between the Amorites and the Hittites and all the other ites. Hugely idolatrous nation. God said, go in and destroy and eliminate all of the people. I don't want you to get caught up in their idolatry, but they did. They did, and they compromised. So they were never the witnesses that they needed to be, and God held them accountable for that. But there were also nations, all of those surrounding nations that also continually came against Israel, eventually including the Assyrians, who took the northern kingdom, and then the Babylonians, who took the southern kingdom, and those who followed them in terms of Roman rule. Okay, go with me to Ezekiel. There were so many places that I could go, but I think Ezekiel kind of covered it better than anything else. So I ended up here. Let me give you just a quick synopsis. Ezekiel was a post-exilic prophet to Israel. He came along prior to Israel going into exile in Babylonian for the 70 years, and he was the prophet that God used to speak. The first 24 chapters of Ezekiel deal with Ezekiel's call, and Jerusalem is going to fall. Jerusalem is going to fall. And it fell during Ezekiel's prophetic ministry. In chapters 25 to 32, God pronounces judgment on all of the nations. I think there are 8 of them. All of the nations, Tyre, Sidon, all of the nations, Ammon, Eden, Egypt, all of the nations surrounding Israel. He pronounces judgment on them for how they treated his people. Beginning in chapter 33 through really chapter 39, Ezekiel, the prophet, God makes him the watchman, the messenger to the people. And his message is, I'm going to restore you. I'm going to restore you. I'm going to judge those that didn't treat you right, but I'm going to judge you as well for not being what you should have been for me, bearing the responsibility. But I am going to fully restore you one day. Watch and warn. Now, we're in this section, God's punishment of Israel. I'm making my way over just a little bit to chapter 36. Chapter 36. And chapter 36, and again, my Bible's got some headings in it. Chapter 36 is all about the restoration, the future restoration of Israel. Future restoration. Still preserved now, but future full restoration where all of the promises have been lived out. And in chapter 36, the first part of the opening part is judgment of Israel's oppressors. And then the last part, Israel will be restored and returned. I wish I had time to read all of that. But let me say this. Ever since Babylonian captivity, 586 BC, all the way through the Romans basically destroying Jerusalem and tracking folks down, the last stronghold of Jews in Masada in 70 AD, basically the Jewish nation, as a people, were dispersed all over the globe. All over the globe. Though they first occupied the land in Abraham in 2000, and they were taken out of the land and judged out of the land as a result of their own disobedience. But if you track the history, go to the next slide, if you would, please. Go to the next slide. Let me have this. Here is creation, Adam and Eve, Abraham about 2,000 years later, Noah born, okay? Just kind of follow. I'm going to need to get my notes because I want you to see ever since 70 AD when the Jews were dispersed all over the globe, up until 1948, they were ruled by foreign empires. Okay? They were ruled by foreign empires all the way between. See what happened, when the monarchy, you had Saul and then David and then Solomon that ruled. They ruled for about between the three of them for about 100 years. And then remember, the kingdom got divided, and frankly, been divided ever since. All right. But eventually we were brought together. So when we get down to about 587 BC, the Babylonians take them. Okay, now just follow with me. Look at the times here. The Persians defeated the Babylonians in 538, and they ruled in 538. Hard to believe. They ruled for the next 250 years. Okay, and then following the Babylonians, were the Persians, and then the Persians were defeated, anybody know? By the Greeks, Alexander the Great. And the Greeks ruled Palestine, Israel, for the next 400 years. And then the Greeks were defeated by the Romans, who ruled for the next 250 years. And then the Romans really dissolved themselves morally. Then the Byzantine Empire, which was really Eastern Rome, they came along and ruled for 300 years. And then the Muslims came along, and they ruled for the next 300 plus years. And then the Crusaders came along, 1092 to 1291, to give you an idea. The Crusaders ruled for 200 years. And then 1291 to 1510 AD, 200 plus years, the Mamluks, that's Egypt, ruled. And then in 1510 to 1917, the Ottomans, or the Turks, who were frankly proxies of Germany. Okay? So I've taken you through hundreds of years and all of these differing empires that have ruled the land and have mistreated, as it were, the people of Israel. In 1917, Great Britain took over from the Ottomans, took over the land of Israel and ruled it for about 30 years, but began to give a lot of freedom, at first especially, for the Jewish people to return to their homeland. Now, they eventually kind of reneged on that promise, but in 1948, at the lead really of Great Britain and our then President Truman, in May 14, 1948, the League of Nations, now known as the United Nations, basically recognized Israel official statehood. Okay? So they enter the land in 2000 BC or thereabout, as God gave them the land. They get dispersed 2000 BC to 1948. That's almost, 4,000 years? Okay. No, they're not occupiers. No, they're not trespassers. They got there long before anybody else got there. Okay. You say, well, what about the Muslim argument? Well, you got to go back to Genesis 15:8. And Genesis 15, when God had given a promise for years, Abraham, you and Sarah, you're going to have a baby at your old age. You just got to trust me. And they didn't. What did they do? Sarah took matters in her own hands, okay, and said, hey, listen, why don't you sleep with my slave girl, Hagar? Since I can't have a baby, why don't you have one through her, okay? I would like to think Abraham argued with her, but got my doubts. Okay. Are you sure, honey? Okay. Yeah. I don't really want to do this, honey. Okay. But, I doubt that was the case. But nonetheless, he lies with Hagar, and they have a baby, Ishmael. And God was very clear. Read chapter 15 and 16. Okay. That's not the promised child. Now, the Muslim believes he is. And ever since Sarah told Abraham to go lie with Hagar, there has not been peace in the Middle East. Okay? But Abraham got there first. And Isaac was a son of promise, not Ishmael. Okay? But hence, that's where the tension has been for these thousands of years as a result of what Abraham and Sarah did. So ever since then, and you ought to do, on May 14th, 1948, when Israel's statehood was declared by the League of Nations, United Nations, they were attacked on all sides by the Muslims. All sides. And here's this little bitty nation being attacked from all sides. One. And then in 1967, there was the 6-Day War. This little bitty nation attacked from all sides, ends a war in 6 days. And then in 1973, the Yom Kippur War in October, I think it was, of 73. And then the latest big intifada, as it were, October 7th, 2023. Okay? So God judged Israel, and he allowed them to be dispersed. He allowed them to be defeated. He allowed them to go into exile. He allowed them to be scattered everywhere with their disobedience. But he also judged those nations that mistreated his people. Okay? I'll talk a little bit more about this next week. But if you look globally, influential globally, just for a minute, okay? Think about Greece, Rome, the Byzantines, Egypt, the Turks, the Britons. They all exist. But how influential are they globally? Not much. Which is where America's headed. Not non-existence. Just doesn't matter. Just doesn't matter. Now, let me close let me close. Last point, God's plan for the future of the nation of Israel. Again, in Ezekiel 33 to 48, you get really the future of Israel, its restoration. And I hope, I've got the references up there. I hope you'll be able to take time to read them. God defends Israel for his name's sake. Please read that section over and over again. I'm not doing this, Israel, because of you. I'm doing it because of me. Because for my name's sake, for my holiness, for me. And the reason I'm doing what I'm doing to you and to those who have been enemies to you is so that they will know me. So that they will know me. This is not about you. It's about me. Next, God declares himself to all the nations through the reestablishment of the nation of Israel. And it is an unbelievable story. I really wish that I could really expand this. But think of this little country that's on just right at 3% of the landmass that God has promised them. And they have been, the effort to obliterate them has been going on almost since they came into existence. And just listen at some of the Jewish, as it were, contributions. Just stay with me on this. For instance, have you ever been to see that land? Okay, it's a wasteland. Okay, especially was prior. But since the Jewish people have been back into their homeland in 1948, okay, they have become one of the most prosperous and most prolific nations on the planet agriculturally. They supply all of the fruit and much of the agriculture for all of Europe. Does the little nation of Israel. They have one of the world's leading greenhouse food exporting nations in the world. They export more than $1.3 billion worth of agricultural products every year. Drip irrigation, which is a game changer, even for Florida. Okay, they founded that. It came from them. And when they discovered it, they turned the desert into a forest as a result of it, and fertile fields. What about the people? The people have been scattered, oppressed, and massacred all over the world. But when you look at the history of the Jewish people and its preservation, it is absolutely staggering of God's protective hand on them. Just a couple of examples. Between 1901 and 2018, 900 Nobel Prizes were given for math, science, literature, peace, so on. 900. 203 of them, 23%, given to Jews. Let me give you, and the Jews population, world population percentage, 0.19. And they won 23% of the Nobel Peace Prizes, Nobel Prizes. In contrast, the Muslims. I'm not trying to denigrate the Muslims. I'm trying to give you a comparison of God's preserving hand. The Muslims are not 0.19% of the world population. They're 23%. You know how many Nobel Prizes they won over the 900? 12. Again, I'm not disparaging, as it were, them. I'm just saying it's a testimony to God's preservation of his people as he promised. And that goes without saying that perhaps the greatest contribution of the Jewish people was a Savior and a Bible that we have all through the Jewish people. Okay? So, and then lastly, God demonstrates his faithfulness and power through the restoration of Israel as a nation. In chapter 37, the opening part, you have the story of the Valley of Dry Bones. That's a picture of the nation of Israel, basically left for dead. And God comes in, okay, and restores the nation, beginning, I think, in 1948, but certainly not anywhere near done. And he will, resurrecting it, you might say, from the dead. And then and then restoring the divided kingdom into a united kingdom. No more southern kingdom, northern kingdom. All of those list of names and tribes, that was all lost, and they are a one, as it were, a one people since 1948, reunited, frankly, after 2,800 years. So I want to close with this is an illustration that I really came across from Dr. David Jeremiah. That it was really helpful, to me in understanding this story of Israel. So listen carefully as I wrap up here. Here's an illustration. Imagine that you're sitting in your reserved seat at a theater production. Just before the curtain rises, you get an important phone call on your cell phone. So you leave your coat on your seat and you go to the lobby to return the call in private. You return to discover a stranger is sitting on your coat in your seat. The squatter refuses to leave, and he only does so after an embarrassing scene in which the ushers force him to abandon the seat that he cannot prove ownership of. You, however, have your reserved seat ticket stub to prove access to the seat. Got it? In that illustration, the theater goer is the nation Israel. The seat is Israel's homeland, promised to them by God. The ticket is the Bible, where the legal assignment of the land is recorded repeatedly. The temporary vacancy of the seat represents Israel's temporary absence from AD 70 to 1948. The squatter represents various groups, and we can all name them, who have availed themselves of the opportunity to take the land in Israel's absence. The coat represents, those of us who've been there know this, the historical and archaeological artifacts throughout the land that show of Israel's previous habitation. The usher, at least in 1948, was the League of Nations, the United Nations, followed by a successor, United Nations, who said, this is Israel's seat. God had already said it. Now the United Nations, this is Israel's seat. Israel is not taking land that she does not deserve. She is just occupying land given to her by God. She is not doing something that she should not do, for which she should apologize or stand in defense. She is simply doing what God allowed her to do by His promise to her in His Word. In His Word. God, I don't know why, it was God's sovereignty, but God chose to give them the land. So, in closing, the promise of a people, of a Jewish nation, fulfilled. The promise of a Messiah, fulfilled. The land promise yet remains. But God gave that to them as an everlasting possession and to no one else. They are not occupiers and they are not squatters. They were there hundreds of years before anyone else, including the Palestinians. They are still the apple of God's eye. And the prophet Zechariah said, he who touches my people touches the apple of my eye. God has promised to come against all who come against His people, including America. And that's what we'll deal with next. Okay? For any time remaining, I knew this, the nature of this wasn't me to give you 3 or 4 questions about, as it were, the Bible study. But feel free to talk about any takeaways from the lesson. Okay. And then if there's time remaining, I try to do some of this around our Christmas event, but take turns at the table, talk a little bit about each other, your family history, your work history, maybe your favorite pastime. If there's time, if there's not, don't worry about it. Okay. All right. Next week, okay. Israel, America, and the church and end times. Okay. Father, thank you for our time together. Just a lot of information to absorb. But Lord, you've been real clear from the beginning. Out of your own sovereign predetermination, you created a people. Yes, they have disobeyed you. No, they have not en masse accepted your Messiah. But you have promised one day, most will. And then they will finally realize the land promise and more than what you've given to them.